covering the political landscape along the I-4 corridor. Welcome to Political Connections.
And welcome back to Political Connections. I'm Al Rochelle. You know, the election for governor isn't until 2018. Joining me right now is Bob White. On the Republican side, he would like to be your governor along with, 8 other people so far, just on the Republican side alone. Is that right?
That's exactly right. It's a crowded field, but there are only 2 viable candidates at this point in time, myself and Adam Putnam, our Commissioner of Agriculture.
Now, for people who don't know you, I know who you are. You were with the Republican Liberty Caucus.
Right.
Why did you decide to run for governor? And what makes you qualified, as they say?
Well, you mentioned my connection with the Republican Liberty Caucus. I've been the chairman of the Central Florida chapter for 7 years. I've been the chairman of the state organization for the last 4 years. So during that period of time, for the last 7 years, I've been back and forth to Tallahassee an awful lot during the legislative sessions as well as during committee weeks leading up to the session. We put together an agenda of bills that we either support or oppose every year during the session, and we try to work those bills through the process. Some of them are bills that we've initiated ourselves. Some of them are introduced by the legislators, and we just pick up on them because they're, they fit with our program, they fit with our philosophy. But one of the things that I've noticed over the last several years, it's a very disturbing trend. I believe the people of Florida have lost their voice in Tallahassee in the legislative process. They've lost their voice before government in general in Tallahassee. It's been literally drowned out by millions and millions of dollars in dark money, special interest contributions that are flowing through political committees that are being operated by legislators, by candidates for office, all done in a way to be able to hide from the public where the money's originally coming from in the first place.
This wouldn't be new that people have claimed that, because when you do go to Tallahassee, you see that there's the budget process, but there's the committee process. You can have a great bill, but if you can't get it through committee, it doesn't get to be voted on. That the Speaker of the House and the President of the Senate have an incredible amount of power to get things done or not get things done.
They do. That's exactly right. And so that's what I'm running against. I'm running against and for, actually, campaign finance reform, because we need to reform that process. Because, as you mentioned, when a candidate who's running for political office establishes their campaign account, like I've done, the maximum amount of a contribution that anyone can make to me running for governor, which is statewide, is $3,000. But if I wanted to, I could establish a political committee outside my campaign account, open up another bank account over there, like Adam Putnam has done, and I could collect 6-figure, 5-figure contributions into that account and literally run my campaign out of that account if I wanted to. And that's what Adam is doing. And that's what the other candidates that are rumored to be getting into the race are also doing. And so you see these special interests, these 6-figure checks that are coming into their political committees from the special interest that I'm talking about.
So how would you do? Would you bother and just say you can't have political action committees, or what?
Well, what we've done is the approach that we've taken over the last couple of legislative sessions is that we've actually had bills written and introduced by a few different legislators, and we've tried to rein in on the ability of the candidates to transfer the money back and forth to each other. Like, for instance, right now, you mentioned the Speaker or you mentioned the Senate President. They, because of their level of influence, their power, they can establish a political committee. They can raise millions and millions of dollars in those political committees, and then they can dole that money out by making contributions to the other political committees that are being operated by other legislators, state House members or state Senate members, and it's how the leadership helps them keep these members in line and keep them towing the leadership line and advancing the leadership agenda.
So this is sometimes what they call the game that's played in Tallahassee, but in Washington, D.C., okay? In 2 minutes, how do you correct that then? Do you ban all of that kind of, in quote, soft money that's out there that you can't really track?
Well, I don't think you can really ban it all, because we do have freedom of speech in this country, but what you can do is you can amend the statute to say that they cannot contribute money to each other. So at the very least, when somebody makes a contribution into a political committee, it shows up on that contribution report, and you can very easily determine the original source of the money. Once they start transferring it back and forth, then you just about have to become a forensic accountant to be able to find out where the money originally came from.
So campaign reform is one of your big things that you want to run on. Give me some of the other issues that you're running on.
Well, education is huge, of course. I mean, in the state of Florida, the Constitution requires that the state take responsibility for making sure that every student in the state has equal access to a quality education.
And the word quality education has been sometimes one of the things that's kind of like, well, what do they mean by that?
It's very suspect. Everybody says, well, we ought to be pushing more and more responsibility and more decision making down to the local level, and I absolutely 100% agree with that. But the state does hold that obligation to make sure that equal access is granted everywhere. So you do have to have some balancing between the wealthier counties and the poorer counties financially. Okay, so that's a huge issue. But I believe that we've gotten to a point in education in Florida because of, for instance, Common Core, which is a top-down burden that's been placed on our education system from the federal government. But also here locally, we've relied way too heavily on high-stakes standardized testing.
Right.
And we have to try to get away from that. Now, we need to have accountability. We need to test, no question about that. But when the stakes are so high, when schools are being graded, when teachers are being graded,
and their salaries
when students
are dependent upon that. Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah.
So then it becomes this incentive for the teachers to just teach to the test.
Now, you were the Republican Liberty Caucus. Republican side is often criticized as the Republicans don't really care about people as much as the Democrats do.
Right.
We know that Medicare expansion has been a big political football for years, but the fact is that there are more and more people in the state of Florida, because of the age of the people here, that are more and more dependent upon Medicare and Medicaid.
Right.
How do you take care of people without creating an additional tax burden on folks, but there is that expectation that you're going to take care of those folks?
Sure. Well, what I've been saying all along is that if you really did care about the poor in the state of Florida or in the country in general, the last thing in the world you would want to do is expand the Medicaid system, which is already overburdened to the point where Medicaid recipients, the patients themselves, they typically wait 45 days, 60 days to get an appointment. Sometimes they have to drive 45 minutes or an hour to see a doctor that's willing to accept a new Medicaid patient. You know, that's not taking care of the poor. So to expand that system and add another 800,000 people into the system as was being advocated would be a big mistake. But we do have an obligation to make sure that they have access to quality health care. Now so I would be looking, as governor of the state of Florida, I'd be looking at trying to find free market ways to expand health care and to make it more available, you know, and to try to address that accessibility issue so that they can get in to see the doctors faster.
Let's talk about something else. This this legislative session, the Visit Florida and the economic impact that was going to be provided for businesses, incentives for them to come here. Would you have supported both of those bills? Because Richard Corcoran tried not to allow any expansion in those areas, but in the bottom line, Visit Florida got money, and so did the jobs program.
Yeah, Richard was he was against corporate welfare until he was for corporate welfare.
Okay.
At the end, certainly there was a huge confrontation between the speaker and between the governor on whether or not those programs were going to be funded. They were zeroed out in the original budget. But then when they got into the special session, of course, the speaker had his education bill that he was desperate to get signed by the governor. And I think that there was a trade-off made, basically, where the speaker just basically relaxed and let up on funding for those. So
bottom line, would you have supported both of those programs? Yes,
no,
or no?
I would not have.
And lastly, because we're almost out of time, with 9 candidates on the Republican side, and we'll see when we get to June of next year who really qualifies monetarily, but in a primary, it's just whoever gets the most votes, right?
That's exactly right. It's a plurality.
So if you have 5 or 6 candidates, you could have somebody that wins with 30% of the vote.
Or less. Anything can happen.
Adam Putnam is your biggest challenger right now?
So far.
And on the Democratic side?
Well, on the Democratic side, you've got Gwen Graham, who's basically playing off of the popularity of her father. And using that name ID, if you will. And then you've got Andrew Gillum, the mayor of the city of Tallahassee. Of course, you know, the city government in Tallahassee is under FDLE investigation and FBI investigation right now, so he's got some issues there. And of course, the big dog in that race, if he chooses to get in, will be John Morgan.
Right, yeah, and that'll be interesting to find out. Good talking to you. The first time I've had a chance to meet you. I'm sure we'll have you back on again, so thank you so much. Bob White running as a Republican for governor in 2018. Remember, that's a little ways out, but we'll be covering it very intently here on Bay News 9 and Political Connections.